Living in France since 11 years, working in the French public sector as a translator and married to a Frenchman. Yes, I can definitely say that I speak French now. How I went from nothing to fluent French now, and it wasn't a very easy journey. A big hello to you. Bonjour and namaste. Salam alaikum. From Shalinee in France. You can subscribe to my channel if you haven't already to know more about my life here in France. So today I'm going to speak to you about how I learned French. There are some people who do learn the language pretty quick, and there are some people who really take a long time to learn. In fact, as a translator, I have to translate for people who still can't speak French, and I myself have been very surprised to come across people who have been in the country for 10, 15, up to 20 years, and their French is very broken. They can speak a few phrases of it, but not really enough for them to express themselves to doctors or in the prefecture. So if you are planning to come and live in France, definitely to have a very good working knowledge of the language is important. This can help you a lot if you are starting to have a family over here. Let me give you now a few tips of how I learned French when I came into France. I was in France in the year 2010, and the first thing that I did was to register myself as a student in Alliance Française in Paris. Now, the classroom that I found myself here in Paris, there were about 20-25 students, and if the motivation isn't very strong amongst the students, I feel that your progress, it doesn't really go very well. I did just a month class of Alliance Française before I stopped it, and I decided to study myself on my own. I must include over here that I don't speak in French with my husband. I know a lot of non-French men and women who are married to the French, and they really speed up in their learning of French. Luckily or unluckily for me, my husband, he didn't want to switch the language of the relationship. It has always stuck in English up till this day. So at home, I don't speak French. I need to speak French only when I'm outside of the house. For example, with my neighbors, at the school, with my son's friends and their parents, and definitely, of course, at work. So at the very beginning, the first hurdle for me where communication was concerned was, of course, with my own in-laws. But even though they could speak English, but they preferred to speak to me in French so that I could get on to learning French. I hadn't learned a new language actually in all my life. So learning French was the first time that I had to really learn a language completely, very, very well. And the more you get into learning French, the more you understand that actually it's a complicated language. However, I don't want to discourage you, because French is definitely a complicated language if you want to master it. But if you need to have a good working knowledge of your French, yes, you have to give in your hard work, but it will be fruitful, and you will be able to say that you are a fluent French speaker, even if you are not going to become an author one day and write a book. So let me start giving you some tips. How did I learn French? If you want to learn a language, the most important thing that's going to help you learn the language is if you love the language. So if you are learning the language because you're obliged to, then the process is going to be very hard. You need to have an interest into the French culture, into the French food, into French music, French arts. You have to start to dig a little bit into what the French culture is all about. You will discover things in France that you are really interested to know more about, and this will help you to learn the language better. For me, a language and the culture are interconnected to each other. So I feel for you to really improve on your language, you need to love some part of the language or the culture first. How did I learn French? At the very beginning, I always knew that in French, conjugation is very important. So I got myself a French grammar book that was only full of conjugation, and I practiced every day for 3 hours. I think for the first 5 or 6 months, I would take a book and I would write down every day the conjugations, and this is definitely an advice that I would give you as well. It is important to learn French, not just spoken form, but also the written form. The way how you pronounce French and the way how you write French can be so different. So I feel that your confidence of learning the language will be boosted when you speak it, and in your mind you know how it would be written as well. I would suggest, if you are a student and learning French, get yourself a nice big notebook and get yourself and find yourself a good conjugation book, and you can practice as much as you want. Of course, I'm not suggesting that you practice up to 3 hours a day. That time it was a little critical for me to learn French very fast, and I had a lot of time in my hands because I wasn't working, so I was able to give in up to 3 hours a day. When I first came into France, I was quite surprised that French programs on TV were really very good. Even though I didn't understand the language, but just to watch the visuals and to watch the variety of programs on TV, that was very attractive to me. I love documentaries. There's a channel called Arte, and if you have access to it, I'm sure that you can find it on YouTube. I would suggest that you look into it, because the programs are really very nice. Surprisingly, compared to the TV culture that I have lived in other countries before, I don't see a lot of sitcoms or a lot of serials. There's quite a lot of reality shows and mostly once again documentaries, and there's a lot of programs on food. So this is very interesting because definitely when you learn a language, you are learning the culture as well. Watching French TV programs helped me understand a lot about the French pride in their cheese, their wine, methods of cooking. You can find specialty dishes in every region of France, so I learned a lot of that through TV programs. But when I first arrived France, I was exposed to the culture of the BD or the bande dessinée. This is actually comic books, and comic book culture in France is really massive. So this was a huge surprise for me because I already loved comic books. And definitely the comic book culture in France is not meant only for children. It is also meant for adolescents, it is also meant for young people, and also for grown-ups. So this was the best way for me to actually learn French. I could start with reading through children's comic books first. I would suggest that if you are in France, or even if you're living outside France, you can register yourselves at the Alliance Française or any place that you can lay your hands on French books, and you can start reading them to know what is French cooking about. So maybe you can start looking through English books. So this is just an example of the kind of food that you can get in France. This is called the Ethnic Paris Cookbook. So this is not the best example to learn French cuisine, but this is a very good book to know about the different kinds of food that exists in Paris. I started to get French cookbooks like this one. So I have quite a big library of French cookbooks because I love them. And just look at this beautiful, just even the text is so pretty, and this one has very interesting illustrations on it. I have a lot of vintage French recipe books as well. There are two things that you are learning. You are definitely learning about French food, and you are also trying to understand how to cook it, and to understand the instructions you need to learn French. So this is a great exercise. Now I'm going to tell you what really sped up my whole process of learning French. If you have newly arrived into France, is to start working as soon as you can. I know that this might sound easier than done, because a lot of foreigners in France, they struggle to find a job, especially in these times. In my first 6 months of arriving into France, I was very lucky to get a job actually right away. This was a work in an insurance company, and it's an international insurance company, and I worked there for 2 years. I had a CDI contract, and that experience was actually one of the best that I've ever had. in terms of colleagues, in terms of work, and most importantly to pick up the language. So no matter how much efforts I made on my own at home, working on French, practicing the conjugations, watching TV, going to the market and practicing my very little French with the vendors, but this was what really kick-started my learning of the French, which was to work in an office. The environment was meant to be international, but through my work I had to actually communicate a lot with French colleagues and also French clients. The learning curve for me at that time was extremely sharp, and I still remember that there were many clients as well as colleagues who were astonished and unhappy because they could see that my communication skill was really minimal at that time in French. It was a very hard time for me. I was extremely stressed, and I must say that it was really this experience of actually working in a workplace that helped me tremendously to pick up the language fast. I do hope that my own experiences of learning the French language have helped you out or seem useful to you. If you have lived in France or are living overseas and you have learned or picked up French language yourself, maybe you can give your tips as well. That would be very nice on how you learned French yourself. I look forward to reading your comments, and now I look forward to seeing you in my next video. À la prochaine. Bye bye.